Hello, Ms. Garcia and Ms. Smith. I want to thank you for allowing me to take the time to present the details around IFRS and um, GAAP conversion with you today. We've got a presentation here. We want to walk through some of the issues that you're going to find as you're trying to sort through these sort of international conversion problems. Today we're looking specifically at the automotive industry. So we'll jump right in, and we want to first, give a guide of what we want to speak to today. Obviously talk about some of the general concerns, and then we'll focus mostly today on just the formatting issues going from IFRS to GAAP and vice versa from a balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow perspective. But before we jump into those formatting issues, I did want to highlight it's really an in-depth process to convert IFRS to GAAP, GAAP to IFRS. IFRS, obviously, more so principle-based. GAAP tends to be more, very prescriptive, focus on, lots of rules that cover the various issues. But in that, you'll find, issues around basis, fair value measurement. Recently, we've seen some variation. There was an attempt to get leases to converge between IFRS and GAAP. That didn't work out so well. And a new standard coming out, IFRS 17 for insurance contracts. But you'll see a lot of these concerns, obviously Forex and things like that you'll have to deal with. But jumping right into some of the conversion issues we'll see here, and I'll switch to the Excel, which should be a little easier to see. So here, if we look at General Motors balance sheet, you'll see just from a view perspective, fairly similar in the number of items that are tracked. However, some of the differences you'll find are in GAAP, the current assets are going to be listed first. In IFRS, they'll be listed last. Otherwise, there's generally a fairly straightforward one-to-one translation, if you will, other than the various subjects we talked about on the first slide. Otherwise, things get really complex trying to dig into basis, valuation, so on and so forth. But just from a formatting perspective, some things are going to be straightforward, like retained earnings. Other things, you have to think through, like, okay, capital reserves versus additional paid-in capital. Probably going to be the same thing, but are there some differences in definitions there? And looking at the Daimler to GM version, you'll see that a lot more calculations required on just as far as tracking of the various data, but otherwise it's similar going back, from your assets, liabilities, equity, and going back to the same in US GAAP. So if we jump over to the income statement, you'll see here the IFRS version is much shorter, straight to the point, significant amount more detail in GAAP if we look at it from a IFRS to US GAAP situation. You get something similar as well, but again, if you look at some of the various titles, you'll see clear similarities to translate, but there's also going to be other complexities, especially getting things like non-controlling interests and discontinued operations and so on and so forth. The rules around those things are going to be relatively different. And then lastly, looking at cash flow, these are probably going to be some of the closest. Again, you'll get into some of the nomenclature changes, but generally speaking, there's, a similar amount of categories for each, and the categories really aren't going to be one to one. And again, you'll have to take into account issues around discontinued operations and things like that to complete the translation. So, going back to the presentation, we just kind of walk through what these looks like on each slide, the same that we've done in the Excel. And just to kind of go back and reiterate, there's going to be formatting issues across your major income statements, but the general conversion issues, again, valuation issues, discontinued operations, just issues associated with the philosophical differences between the US GAAP and IFRS are probably going to be some of the biggest challenges you'll face. Thank you for your time. Thanks.